She leaned in so close I could feel her breath on my skin, and with a half-smile she whispered, "You don't know what you're in for." In that moment, I realized my boss wasn't just testing my work, she was testing me. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was a Monday morning, my very first day at the new job. I was nervous, the kind of nervous you try to hide by straightening your tie a little too many times, or pretending you know where the coffee machine is when you absolutely don't. The office itself was modern, glass walls, polished desks, the low hum of computers and conversations, but the energy shifted the moment she walked in. She didn't need to announce herself. The sound of her heels against the floor was enough. Steady. Unhurried. Each step seemed to command the room, and in an instant, conversation softened, eyes discreetly followed her. She had that presence you can't really explain, the kind that says she knows exactly who she is, and everyone else knows it too. When she came closer, I noticed details I'd never forget. Her hair, pulled back neatly, yet not without softness. The faintest trace of perfume lingered as she passed, subtle but warm, like cedarwood layered with something floral. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, even measured, but carried a weight that made you want to lean in and listen. I'd been told she was brilliant. That she was tough, fair, and that people both admired and feared her. But none of that prepared me for the way her presence actually felt, like standing in the glow of a fire you weren't sure you should get closer to. Then her eyes found me. She stopped at my desk, and suddenly it felt as if the whole office had faded into silence. There was no reason for my pulse to pick up, no reason for my throat to tighten, but it did. She extended her hand, confident, graceful, and I stood too quickly, almost knocking over my chair in the process. "Welcome aboard," she said, her lips curved in what wasn't quite a smile, but not entirely neutral either. Somewhere between professional courtesy and quiet curiosity. Her handshake was firm yet warm, her fingers cool at first, then softening as they lingered just a second longer than expected. I tried to answer with something polished, something impressive, but what came out was little more than a stammered thank you. She studied me, not unkindly, just observant. As if she could read every thought I was trying to suppress. And then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she moved on, giving a brief instruction to someone nearby, her focus already elsewhere. But for me, the moment stretched far beyond the time it lasted. Even then, on that very first day, I knew she wasn't just my boss. She was going to be the person I measured myself against, the one whose approval I'd quietly crave. And though I couldn't admit it to myself at the time, I already felt a pull toward her, one I didn't yet understand. By the second week, I learned that she didn't waste words. She never raised her voice, never needed to. A single look from her carried more weight than a paragraph from anyone else. That morning, she stopped by my desk again, but this time she didn't just greet me and move on. Instead, she glanced at my monitor, then at me, and said, "Walk with me." Her tone left no room for hesitation, so I did. The click of her heels echoed along the corridor as we made our way into a smaller meeting room. The glass walls gave a view of the office, but inside, it felt strangely private, like stepping into a space that belonged only to her. She laid a folder on the table and slid it toward me. "I want you to take this project," she said. "It's bigger than what you've handled so far, and it matters." I opened the folder. Charts, figures, names of clients I'd only heard mentioned in passing. My stomach tightened. I was barely finding my footing with routine tasks, and here she was, placing something in front of me that seemed out of reach. She must have noticed the flicker of doubt in my expression, because her gaze softened, just slightly. "You'll figure it out," she said. "But understand this, around here, the margin for error is thin. If you fall behind, I won't slow down to catch you." Her words should have felt intimidating. Maybe they were. But the way she said them, low, steady, with that almost imperceptible lean toward me, made it feel less like a threat and more like a challenge. A test. I nodded quickly, trying to mask the nerves. "I'll handle it." Her lips curved again, that same not quite smile I'd seen before. She stepped closer, pointing at a chart in the folder, her hand brushing the edge of my sleeve as she did. It was the lightest touch, barely there, almost accidental, but it sent a current through me that I wasn't prepared for. I forced myself to focus on her words, timelines, priorities, expectations. But all the while, the warmth of where her fingers had grazed my arm lingered like a secret I wasn't supposed to notice. When she finished, she closed the folder with deliberate calm. "Good," she said, eyes meeting mine. "Let's see what you can do." She walked out then, leaving the faint trace of her perfume and the weight of her expectation behind. I stood there for a long moment, folder in hand, heart still beating harder than it should have been. I wasn't sure if she believed I was capable, or if she was simply curious to see whether I'd sink or swim. Either way, it was clear, she had just drawn a line in the sand. And if I wanted her respect, maybe even something more, I'd have to prove myself. Most people left the office at 6. By 7, the floors grew quieter, the hum of conversations fading into the low drone of computers left on standby. By 8, it was nearly empty, just the occasional creak of the air conditioning and the faint glow of desk lamps. That night, I was still at my desk, hunched over the folder she'd given me, my notes scattered, my pen tapping restlessly. I didn't notice she was still there until I looked up and saw the faint light spilling from her office. The glass walls framed her silhouette, still seated, still working. Her jacket was draped over the back of her chair, her blouse sleeves rolled just past her elbows. She looked different in the softer light, less like the untouchable figure who commanded every room, and more like someone carrying a weight too heavy to set down. I told myself not to disturb her, but when she finally stepped out, catching me mid-yawn at my desk, I didn't have the chance. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual, the edge of authority softened. I straightened instantly, trying to make sense of this project. Her eyes flicked to the mess of papers spread before me, then back to my face. For the first time, I thought I saw amusement in her expression, a brief, almost playful glint. "Ambitious," she said, walking over. "But you won't solve it all in one night." She leaned over the desk, pointing to one of my charts. The fabric of her blouse brushed my arm, and I felt the faint warmth of her shoulder almost against mine. My breath caught, though I tried to hide it. "You're overcomplicating it," she said, her voice low. "Strip it down. Focus on the essentials." I glanced at her hand where it rested on the page, at the delicate curve of her wrist, the faint silver band of a watch that caught the lamplight. I forced myself to look back at the chart, to listen, but every detail of her presence pressed in, the scent of her perfume, the warmth of her leaning closer than she needed to, the steadiness in her tone. When she finally straightened, I thought she might leave. Instead, she lingered, arms folded, studying me. "You remind me of myself years ago," she said softly, almost to herself. Then, as though catching the slip, she gave a small shake of her head. "Never mind." There was a pause, long enough for the silence to become heavy, but not uncomfortable. My nerves pushed me to fill it. "You make it look easy," I said. That drew a quiet laugh from her. Not the polite laugh she gave in meetings, but something softer, warmer. "It's not easy," she said, her eyes holding mine for a beat too long. "You just get used to hiding how hard it is." And in that moment, the air between us shifted. For the first time, she wasn't just my boss giving orders. She was a woman revealing, however briefly, that she wasn't invincible. And somehow, she chose to let me see it. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. And yet, in the silence, something unspoken passed between us, something that made me certain this was only the beginning. The project deadline was looming, and the office seemed to hum with a low, constant pressure. Days blurred together, late nights, early mornings, half-finished coffees. But through it all she was there. Steady, precise, demanding. She never asked me if I was tired. She never softened the deadlines. And yet, every time she leaned over my shoulder, or paused a moment too long after giving me instructions, I felt something tightening between us, something I couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. It happened late one evening, after another long day. Most of the office had emptied out. I was at my desk, flipping through pages, when I felt her presence before I saw her. The faint click of her heels slowed, then stopped beside me. "Come with me," she said simply. I followed her into the smaller conference room. The overhead lights were dimmer here, throwing a softer glow across the polished table. She set down a stack of reports, but instead of sitting across from me, she moved to stand beside me, her hip resting lightly against the table's edge. "Walk me through what you've done," she said. I tried to sound confident as I explained, pointing at figures, charts, and summaries. My voice was steady, but my mind was spinning, half focused on the project, half on the fact that she was standing so close I could catch the warmth of her perfume again, familiar now, like something that lingered with me even after I left the office. When I finished, I waited, bracing for her critique. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she leaned closer, one hand resting flat on the table beside mine. Her face was just inches from mine now, her voice dropping low. "You're doing well," she said softly. "Better than I expected." The words should have felt like praise. But the way she said them, with that measured tone and the faint curl of a smile at the corner of her lips, felt like something else entirely. Then she tilted her head, studying me as though she were weighing something. And before I could find anything to say, she leaned in just a little more, her breath brushing against my cheek, her words almost a whisper. "You don't know what you're in for." The sentence hung in the air between us, charged, dangerous, impossible to mistake. My chest tightened, my pulse quickening in a way I couldn't hide. Her gaze lingered on mine, steady, searching, almost daring me to respond. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was hold her eyes, caught between the warning in her voice and the pull in her presence. And then, just as quickly as she had leaned in, she drew back. She gathered the papers, her expression settling back into its usual calm. "You'll figure it out," she said simply, as if nothing unusual had passed between us. But as I stood there, trying to steady myself, I knew something had changed. Her words weren't just about the project. They were about her. About us. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just working under her. I was walking into something far more complicated, and far more dangerous to my heart. After that night, after her words, I couldn't see her the same way. Every meeting, every glance across the room carried an undertone I couldn't ignore. I kept wondering if anyone else could sense it, if the air between us had shifted enough for others to notice. But outwardly, she remained the same, precise, composed, untouchable. It was late again when the first real crack appeared. I had stayed to finish revisions, the office quiet except for the hum of the printer and the tapping of my keyboard. Her office light was still on, as it so often was. Eventually she emerged, carrying her laptop under one arm, her hair slightly loosened from the day. Without the sharpness of morning, she looked softer, though no less striking. "You're still here," she said, her voice carrying a tired edge this time. I shrugged lightly. "Trying to get it right." She gave a small laugh, not mocking, but weary, almost affectionate. "That doesn't go away, you know. No matter how many years you put in." There was something in her tone that made me look up. She leaned against the edge of my desk, setting her laptop down, and for once, her shoulders seemed to drop. "You think I have it all figured out," she said. "Most people do. But the truth is, half the time I'm just trying to stay one step ahead of everything. Deadlines, expectations, the board, the whispers." I frowned slightly. "Whispers?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking away, as if she hadn't meant to say that. But then she exhaled, shaking her head with a faint smile. "People always talk. About how I run things, about how I don't fit the mold. Too young at first, too bold, too." She stopped, her jaw tightening before finishing. "And now? Too old to be chasing this hard." Her words caught me off guard. She had always seemed beyond such doubts, so steady, so certain. Hearing her admit this felt like stepping into a room she rarely let anyone enter. "You're not too old," I said quietly, before I could think better of it. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, almost skeptical. "You say that now," she murmured, "but one day you'll understand how quickly time catches up." The silence that followed was thick, not awkward, but heavy with everything she wasn't saying. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I didn't see her as an age or a role, but as the woman who made entire rooms bend toward her without even trying. But all I could manage was something simpler. "You make it look effortless," I said. Her lips curved faintly, and then, slowly, as if testing both herself and me, she rested her hand lightly on mine, just for a moment. Her touch was warm, steady, yet fleeting, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to let it linger. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just let the quiet weight of her hand settle into me. And when she finally pulled away, her eyes held mine a second longer than necessary. That was the moment I realized she wasn't invincible. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to be. The night it happened, the city was washed in rain. Not the kind that storms down, but a steady mist that softened the street lights and blurred the edges of everything. We had both stayed late again, and when we finally left, it was well past 10. She paused at the front doors of the building, adjusting the strap of her bag, her umbrella in hand. I fumbled with mine, shaking it open clumsily, earning a quiet smile from her. "You're going to get soaked like that," she said, her voice carrying a trace of humor I didn't often hear from her. I laughed lightly, more nervous than amused. "I'll survive." We stepped out together, the city quiet around us. Cars hissed past on the wet streets, and the air smelled faintly of rain on concrete. Our umbrellas brushed as we walked side by side, and for some reason neither of us adjusted to make space. For a while, we said nothing. Just the sound of the rain tapping above us, and the rhythm of our footsteps on the slick pavement. But the silence wasn't empty. It felt weighted. Like every unspoken thought we had held back in the office was now walking between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "You make it easy to forget about work, you know." The words startled me more than I expected. I turned my head, but she was looking straight ahead, her expression calm, though her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her umbrella. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked cautiously. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she gave the smallest shake of her head. "No. It's surprising." Her voice dropped at the last word, almost lost beneath the patter of rain. We stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. She shifted closer, perhaps to avoid the splash of a passing car, and her arm brushed against mine. The contact was so subtle, but she didn't move away. Instead, she stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her through the damp chill of the night. Something in my chest tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled. Before I could untangle them, she turned her head slightly, her eyes finding mine under the dim glow of the streetlight. For a moment neither of us moved. The rain blurred the world around us, leaving only her steady gaze, her presence, the quiet vulnerability that seemed to surface only when no one else was watching. Then, almost without thinking, she stepped closer. Her free hand lifted, hesitated in the air, then rested lightly against my arm. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the rain. "For what?" I asked. Her eyes softened, and she shook her head with a faint smile. "For reminding me what it feels like to not be alone in this." And then, without ceremony, she leaned into me, slow, deliberate, her forehead brushing lightly against my shoulder. I froze for half a breath, then let myself fold into it, my arms circling her in a quiet embrace. She exhaled against me, a breath that carried relief more than anything else. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't anything anyone else would call romantic. But it was more. More than the glances, more than the words. It was the moment our walls gave way, even just a little. And I knew, as we stood there in the rain, that nothing between us could return to the way it had been. The following days carried a quiet shift between us. Nothing was spoken outright, nothing dramatic, but it was there. The glances that lingered a moment too long. The subtle ease that threaded through conversations that once carried only business. It was as if the rain that night had washed away a barrier we had both been clinging to. One evening, another long day behind us, the office had thinned again until it was just the two of us. I was at my desk, finishing a final draft, when I heard her voice behind me. "Come in here for a moment." I followed her into her office. The light was softer than usual, her jacket already draped over the back of her chair, her hair slightly undone from the long day. She didn't sit at her desk, but instead by the low table near the window. She gestured for me to join her. For a few minutes we just sat there, the city glowing quietly beyond the glass, headlights moving like rivers of light far below. She didn't rush to speak, and I didn't press. The silence wasn't heavy this time, it was calm, easy, like a shared breath. Finally she turned toward me, her eyes steady but gentler than I'd ever seen them. "I wasn't sure about this," she admitted, her voice low, measured. "About you. About us." The words hit with a weight I couldn't ignore, though her tone wasn't cold. It was honest. Vulnerable. She reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, then rested her hand lightly on her lap, fingers tracing an invisible pattern against the fabric of her skirt. "People will talk," she continued softly. "They always do. About my choices, about what's appropriate, about what I should or shouldn't want. And for a while, I let that decide for me." She paused, her eyes dropping to her hands. Then, almost as if gathering courage, she lifted her gaze back to mine. "But you've surprised me." Her words were simple, but the way she said them, the softness, the faint tremor beneath her composure, carried more than she probably intended. Without thinking, I reached out, resting my hand gently over hers. Her fingers still beneath mine, warm and delicate, and for once, she didn't pull away. She let the contact linger, her thumb brushing faintly against my skin, a quiet acceptance. "I'm not looking for answers," I said quietly. "I just want to be where you are." For a long moment, she studied me, as though searching for any trace of insincerity. Then, slowly, her expression softened. She shifted closer, her other hand resting lightly against my chest. The weight of it was gentle, grounding. Her eyes shimmered faintly in the city light. "You don't make it easy to keep my guard up," she whispered. I gave a small smile, my hand tightening slightly around hers. "Then maybe that's a good thing." She let out a quiet laugh, soft, real, unguarded. And then she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. No words, no rush. Just the warmth of her closeness, the steadiness of her breathing mingling with mine. In that stillness, I felt it, the quiet certainty that whatever came next, we had already crossed the line together. And there was no going back. Not boss and employee. Not older and younger. Just two people, sitting close in the glow of a city night, holding on to something fragile and real. And for the first time, it felt enough. More than enough.